Hey everybody, welcome to today's live chat. I have been typing and chatting with some of you that have joined earlier on the sidebar. It's been fun kind of answering some questions and kind of compiling some questions for this live chat. So I hope you all are having a great December so far and that everybody is staying safe and healthy. And I'm excited to kind of do a little show and tell, a little Q&A, and kind of go over all the stuff that we've been doing here. So as you know, the Midnight Quilter has launched. This is something that has been really fun, little overwhelming, a little scary, but so great. So I wanted to just take a few moments and do a little show and tell, show you some of the projects and tell you some of the behind the scenes stuff and even give you a little sneak peek as to what's next. Plus, I have a list of questions, so we'll just have a great old time with it. So the Midnight Quilter is something that I have been meaning to do for a long time, but just, kept putting it off. And finally, when, all this COVID stuff happened and travel stopped, I thought, well, there's never going to be a better time to produce my own series. So that started in the summer. We started planning and I was working with my team and I have such a great group of people around me and I'm so proud of what we have put out. So I'm going to kind of go through the quilts, talk a little bit about the quilting and then answer your questions, of course. So let's get to it. So the very first episode, when we were planning out, what quilts do I want to show? This was definitely an easy pick to do this for the first one, because this is a take on the very first Midnight Quilt Show quilt that I did. So it's kind of like an homage to what I've done in the past and kind of like a rework, revamp, bring a new kind of thing. So even though this quilt looks similar, it is different. I've added borders, I've added some different size stars, kind of made it a little bit bigger, but it's definitely very inspired by the previous one. And what was fun about this particular quilt is it's fat quarter friendly. So even though it looks complex, it's just half square triangles put in a different layout. And I think those are the funnest kind of quilts because they look difficult, but they're not. I don't tell people they're not hard. If I give it to them as a gift and they're like, oh, that looked really difficult, I'm like, I know, but you're worth it, it's fine. So this was definitely an easy pick for that, for the Midnight Quilter. And there's a flat shot of it. One question that has came up a lot through releasing the videos is, you want to see more of the quilting or talk more through the quilting. So I'll definitely be including that as more of a component going forward. But this one I didn't really show a whole lot of the quilting, so I thought we would kind of briefly touch on that. This one is quilted very similar to the very first one I've done. I love using feathers to look like they're going on and off the quilt, and that's what I did on the first quilt, so it's so appropriate for this one. But then in the prints, keeping the quilting a little bit more basic, a little bit, more simple, because it's not going to show up as much. I do want to just take a moment, I meant to say this up front. Craftsy, who put together the Midnight Quilt Show, is not the same Craftsy that's here now. So Craftsy is a business, sold a blueprint, and then somebody else bought Craftsy. So there's new Craftsy, and then there's old Craftsy. Midnight Quilt Show was through old Craftsy. Just want to clarify, I don't want it to sound, like I'm harboring any bad feelings against anybody. During that episode, I did kind of give a little bit of the behind the scenes, and it was just nice to come out and kind of say, look, this is what happened, and it's okay, and we're happy to move on. So it was kind of a little bit therapeutic. I loved the support and the response from it, so definitely excited. And I enjoyed doing the Midnight Quilt Show, but it's really fun to get to film in my own space and have total creative control. It's been a lot of fun. So anyway, back to the quilting, switching up the designs, fitting in those feathers, always a fun option. In fact, one of the questions that came through with the chat off to the side was, do I take into account the size of a design for an area? And I do, right? If I have a 1-inch sashing, I might not be able to fit, a lot of designs in there. But I also try to squeeze in designs where I can. So for instance, in this particular Midnight Quilter, Midnight Stars quilt, there wasn't a big enough border for those feathers. So they just quilted them so they look like they're wrapping on and off. So there's ways to kind of finagle it in those areas. Or in the stars, maybe just quilting a part of the feather. You don't have to quilt the whole thing. So while there are some designs that won't work in particular areas, usually I can squish it or spread it out or break it up to make it fit. And I think that's what's really fun about machine quilting is you can definitely do that. And just one last picture of the side. Picking out the fabrics for this was a lot of fun. if you've watched any of the previous videos or tutorials, I, in the past, have not been a huge fan of purple. Not that there's anything against it, but I love gray and blue, so that's where I kind of gravitate. But I've really become drawn to more purpley designs, and so I wanted to include a little bit of purple and some pretty teals and golds. So a lot of fun with that one. So the second one, we decided to do a take on extra wide fabric. So this is the wide Hedges quilt, and this is a really big quilt. It's huge. It's like 92 by 100 or something crazy like that. And my husband's really tall. You know, I want a quilt that's going to cover the bed. So I thought, let's make a big quilt, but let's make one fast. So we used extra wide fabric on the front to make this quilt. So really, it's just 4 different sections, and it's like one big log cabin made with strip units. So even though it's big, there's no matching seams, which is nice for newer quilters. And like if you're at a retreat, well, I was going to say if you're at a retreat, well, then you must be lucky. But in the past, when we could go to retreats, it's nice and mindless. You can chat, you can listen, it's just a lot of straight seams. So that was a lot of fun to take Tula Pink's extra wide backing and put it on the front, because sometimes it's too pretty to put on the back. We did this in 2 different color options, but it was just a fun way to show a big quilt that goes together really easily. But here's the thing, when it came to the machine quilting, sometimes those big quilts are just a pain. Or maybe the fabric is just too busy and you're not going to see the quilting. Well, then opting for an all-over design is perfect. And here I just quilted some swirls and some wavy lines just to kind of, you know, break it up and make it look a little bit more random. The idea is quilting doesn't have to be over the top. I know, I like to quilt things to death, but it doesn't have to be that way. And sometimes it's just easier to do an all-over design. So the question sometimes is, you know, what if I just want to do an all-over? Well, just do it, right? The best way to get something finished is to start it and do what you will do. So that was the second quilt. That was a lot of fun, kind of putting me outside my comfort zone, because it's kind of red and a little bit pink and of course purple. But I thought it was just a nice option. So that was the second video that came out. Well, the third one was the panel play, and it was the idea that, you know, I have joked that there are different people in our lives. There are those that are quilt worthy and those that aren't, whether you love them or not. I'm just putting it out there, right? There's some people that maybe I might not give a quilt to. But then I examine the idea that, you know, sometimes there's people that are so quilt worthy, but there's just a lot of them, right? And so throughout this whole COVID thing, doing the home teaching and this virtual school with the kids, I've realized how much I have not fully appreciated the teachers in their lives. And the idea is starting with a panel and then adding some intricate looking borders around it is a really quick way to create a really custom quilt. Now, for those of you that participate in the Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, this will look familiar because it is that same panel. But here's the deal. This idea works with any panel or any quilt center that is that, I can't remember the size off the top of my head, but the pattern includes them. So if you just want a neat border design around something else. So the idea that using the panel as a jumping off point. This one's a little bit smaller, more throw size, but definitely a great option. So that was kind of a third option. Well, then the 4th week came and we decided to do Dresden plates. Oh, here's a close-up of the quilting, sorry. Lots of fun, different textures. Again, the border is just stitch and flip, so very easy. It just looks more intricate than it actually is. All right, so then the last 2 weeks have been Dresden plates. So this was so fun because we started with this idea, we're kind of throwing things out, and I'm like, oh, let's do some Dresden plates, and then let's do this layout, and we realized this is a lot of content for one video. So let's split it up and separate it, and I'm really glad we did, because it allowed me to do a lot of more detail than I probably would have otherwise. So this is actually a combination of 2 years of Build a Quilt. So Build a Quilt is my block of the month program. It runs November through October, something like that, 1 year. In fact, registration is open, but it's almost closed for next year, or this current year. But through Build a Quilt, we would do 10 different blocks, and then we would do 3 different layout options. So 1 year for Build a Quilt, we had the Dresden plate block. And I was like, oh, so nervous about it, because it just looks difficult. And so I write all the patterns, and I do the illustrations, and I kept putting it off and putting it off. And I think I made it block number 9. I mean, that's how long I put it off. And then once I did it, I thought, this is really fun and easy. and you can do some really neat variations with it. So in the video, we saw how to make the basic Dresden and then 3 more variations. Well, you have all these beautiful sampler blocks, right? What are you going to put them into? You're going to put them into a layout. And so this braid layout is actually one of the layout options that I used for another year of Build a Quilt. So what's great about this layout is that it works with any 12.5-inch blocks. So if you have a big piece of fabric that you want to show off, if you have an orphan block that you want to use, I think what I want to do with this is get, I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan, by the way. I want to get like some Chiefs fabric and put it in the center and put other colors around it. I think that would be really kind of fun. So school spirit, that kind of idea. So the whole thought was, it's going to be a great time to come up with these options. So here are the 4 Dresdens we learned. And I thought, maybe I should design a fabric collection to go with it. It's been a busy fall. What can I say? When we were putting together Build a Quilt for this year, we had such a hard time sourcing fabric and getting enough of it. I mean, we have a lot of people that participate. So this year I designed all the 3 colorways that are offered. So you get to pick which colorway you want. So there's 3 different colorways, and then your blocks, and then your 3 different layouts come out in the middle of the year. So it's totally customizable, which is why we call it Build a Quilt. Well, one of the colorways that I designed was called Inked, and it was inspired by calligraphy, and it's grays and teals, and you can see that online on my website if you want to check it out. But I loved the print so much, I thought, what if I pulled it out and made it a rainbow? So I kind of took that collection and recolored it to make it a rainbow. So these prints are actually part of the Inked Rainbow fabric collection, and they're also the same, inspired by calligraphy, and have fun little sayings, not too snarky, just, all I need is a little bit of wine and a lot of fabric, or you could flip that, either way. But then the braid layout. Braid quilts are so much fun because if you're using those 2-inch strips, it's such a great way to practice sashing designs. It's such a great way to show off smaller prints. That was a point I didn't get to make a whole lot during. I don't think I made it. I think I had to cut that out. But in the tutorial, those smaller prints that you have, those blenders that are so beautiful, like this is perfect for it. I wouldn't necessarily do this with a large focal print because you'll be cutting it pretty small, but definitely for something smaller in those tonal or more basic prints. So very fun. And then I quilted it with green thread, so loved how that popped off. A little nervous, but sometimes you have to put yourself out there and you get a really cool effect. Okay, sneak peek. So next week, this will be the project. I don't have a picture of the finished quilt yet, but this is my first ever English paper pieced project. And so I can't wait to show you. It's called A Twist in Time, and it's featuring Allison Glass's fabric handiwork. And don't be impressed. That thing looks huge, but it's only like this big. I mean, it's going to be like a wall hanging. So we'll talk about how do you machine quilt English paper pieced quilts. Well, the same way as you do regular quilts, but I'll just say it a little better. And how do you actually put those pieces together. So it was a labor of love, a lot of fun, and I'm not going to lie, when I got done, I was really kind of proud of that. I'm like, oh, look at that. So I can't wait to show you that. And then the last episode that will be coming out, I can't remember the date, in 2 weeks, I guess, will be the Scrap-tastic quilt. So sneak peek again. I haven't showed these anywhere, so you're the first to see. This is going to be a stash buster. So if you have a stash, we know you have a stash, we all have a stash. If you have a stash that you want to bust, which I like all my fabric too much, I just buy more. But if you have some scraps laying around or you want a nice scrappy quilt, this is going to be a fun option. It also uses 2.5-inch strips, but they're in smaller pieces and really kind of shows it off. In this particular quilt, I'm using a jelly roll, but like I said, you can definitely use any scraps you have laying around. And the general theme is how do you make a quilt that's scrappy but not crappy. So we kind of talk about some repeating elements, keep it from being overwhelming, and then of course talk about the quilting. So a range of projects, and I'm so excited to see how they go over. After the first season's over, we'll kind of look and see which one was the most popular, and we'll see which one wins. But I think I have another close-up picture here of the Scrap-tastic quilt. So love it, lots of fun. All right, so that's what we have coming up. You have 2 more episodes of the Midnight Quilter, or there may just be a bonus one at the end. We're working on something last minute and fun. Ooh, I can't tell you yet. I'll tell you later. But let's talk about some of the questions that came up. So now we're going to take a quick turn away from the Midnight Quilter. There was a great question that Jackie asked, do I ever do wildlife quilts? And if I do, how would I quilt fur and wind and all that kind of thing? And I was like, well, just so happens I have done it, and I real quickly threw a couple pictures in. So this is to answer Jackie's question. I have done a few wildlife quilts and panels, and this can apply for any panel. So I know another question was, what if you have a picture of something you don't want to take away from? How do you take this intricate looking fabric panel and highlight different elements? So this is a Yellowstone panel. I love the national parks. I have the whole national park passport book, the junior passport book. It's okay that I have that. I'm an adult, but I can have a passport book that I go and get stamped whenever we go places, and I feel like I've got to get all the stamps. Anyway, so I was decorating our basement with national parks, and so this is one of those national parks panels that were out. So there's a lot of things going on. Just want to talk real quick. How do you do the hair, the sky, the fur, all that? Well, the short answer is wavy lines. I mean, if you look at the panel, most of it is just wavy lines or basic shapes. I'm looking more about texture, right? So if it's grass, I'll make it jagged. If it's mountains, I'll do a little different. But it's nothing overly complex. So let's look at a closer picture. So there's the clouds. Clouds are so tricky to quilt. They're so tricky because if you draw a cloud, it looks fine. If you quilt a cloud, it looks like you just made a scribble. So here I'm just doing a little bit of like clamshells on top of each other a little bit. And then for the sky, just that nice wavy kind of design. Now this was actually designed in the very first challenge that I did, so you could check that out. It's like a wavy design, and it just has a little bit of texture, right? Where those lines come closer together and further apart, it's just gonna give it a nice texture. Well, what I did in the sky is the same thing I did in the grass, and you can see that at the bottom of the picture, but it gives you the same effect, right? It's all fine. But then in the buffalo up close, well, look at that, more wavy lines. Except for fur, it's going to be a little bit more directional, right? So for sky or grass, horizontal, but for fur, if there's some detail in the panel, I might try to follow that, which is what I've done here with the buffalo. So as it kind of goes down the leg or across the back, and then playing around with a lot of different thread colors. So I probably had more fun picking thread colors for this than I did actual quilting. Well, maybe not, but really close. So using a bunch of different thread colors to make those elements pop. And here's a little bit more back up picture of it. So in this, there's a lot of buffalo, but the one up close, the biggest one, is the one that gets the most detail. And as you go back in perspective, eventually there's no detail on it. So those little guys in the back, they just get blended in with the grass because that's, it's easier to quilt them that way. They're so small. It's too hard to do so much detail. So pick one or two areas to highlight on the quilt and do a nice overall texture on the rest. So texture, just keeping it consistent where not one thing pops out more than the other, unless I want it to. So like in the trees, there were some areas that were like not quilted, kind of popped out a little bit just to give it just a little different look. So those were a lot of fun. If you're ever interested in playing around with wildlife panels, that's definitely the way to go about it. I mean, any big panel, just practice quilting a design over it, work with different textures, and when you're done and you wash it and you hang it up, all you're going to see is the picture behind it anyway. So you don't have to stress out too much about that. So that was just thrown in there because Jackie had asked about it, and I thought I would throw it in at the end of the show and tell. So how about some questions? Lots of great questions. I will try not to talk too fast, but I do want to get them all in. So we'll see if I can make it happen. All right, so question, let's see, Natasha and Bonnie both asked a similar question, which I'll address. Natasha said, what made me decide to open a quilt shop? And Bonnie said, why did Grandpa teach me how to quilt, and how did I get started? So it's kind of like the first and then the second. So when I met my husband, his grandpa had already been quilting. It was like a family thing, and they would do them for family reunions, and they would, quilting was just like what Grandpa did. And so when I came into the family, I had never made a quilt or sewed or anything. And so I asked Grandpa to show me how to make a quilt. And he said, yeah. So he showed me how to make a quilt, and I was horrible, but he told me I was great, so it was fine. And you loved it, because if you're a quilter, you did your first quilt, and you're like, this is amazing. I really loved it. And I liked the companionship with Grandpa. And we would get together and we'd make quilts, and he was my quilting bee for a while. And so he's actually the reason I'm a machine quilter. We would hand quilt the first several quilts, and then he kind of talked my husband into buying me a long arm. So this story's a little bit more involved, and maybe one day I'll do a whole thing just for the live chat, the whole story. But so I went from hand quilting to long arm quilting because we didn't know you could quilt on your sewing machine. I am so glad, because if he had known, if we might have had to do it on the sewing machine. Anyway, so I get the long arm, not really good at it, but I love it. And so I kept practicing and just kind of turned it into a business. And there's lots of crying and other things along the way. But after 10 years of working from home, I really wanted to get out of the house. And my youngest had just went off to kindergarten, so I was finally free during the day. I won't say free. I was just, I was now more available to go somewhere else. And so we looked for a spot to have a studio, and this retail spot was open. And I'm like, oh, I guess we have to do a quilt shop if it's a retail spot. I was a little in denial. I was like, I don't know. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to be doing a retail shop, I might as well be a handy quilter dealer, because I've already been traveling and teaching for them and being an educator for them. So that's kind of how it all came about. Trust me, it's a lot more not convoluted. It's not as easy as it sounds, but definitely that's how it kind of all came together in a nutshell. But the best way to sum it all up is even a blind squirrel gets a nut sometimes. So I wandered around and wasn't really looking for but I ended up down this path. And I will jump ahead. There were some really great questions, like from Karen and Terry, like, how do I do everything I do? Like, I've got, family and quilting, all this. I have a great help around me. My husband is so supportive. I have an amazing staff. I have great friends. And, I think having a support system around is what really makes it great. I will also say that close enough is good enough that's my motto for quilting, but that's also my life motto. So everything runs about 80%. I'm not a perfect mom, I'm not a perfect shop owner, but as long as I get it close enough, I'm happy with that. So I enjoy what I get to do, and I think it's kind of amazing that I get to turn this passion that I had into this whole big business. And I wish Grandpa were still around. He would just be like blown away by what it all has become. He would tell me I charge way too much for fabric, because he did not like buying really expensive fabric, but he would be really amazed. So definitely surrounded by great help. And I will say it's a little ironic that the person that started me along my free motion journey has never free motion quilted at all in his life. He only hand quilted. So very, very fun. It's nice to go back. But I get to do what I get to do because people like you support and watch and encourage me. And so I definitely, definitely appreciate that. But don't think that I do everything and I do it all well, because I do not. Mariah said, how often do I do the free motion challenge quilting along? She just now kind of stumbled across the channel. It depends. Usually the free motion challenges, I've been kind of averaging like 2 or 3 a year. I want to try to release one quarterly is my goal. But I don't want to overwhelm my staff, because they're the ones that do all the cutting and prepping and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the goal. I already have the next challenge idea percolated. I just need to design the panel and kind of pull that all together. I'm looking towards January for that. So excited to do another challenge. And for those of you that might not know what that is, that's just a video series where we work through a project together. My whole idea was that the only way to get better at machine quilting is to practice, right? I mean, we know this. But what do you practice and how do you practice? And so this is more like it's like I'm your personal trainer, but not for working out, because, no. I'm your personal trainer for machine quilting practice. So that will be coming out soon. Mindy asked a great question. She said, do I buy my own quilts? And if I do I do them by hand or machine? Mindy, I don't often bind my own quilts. I'm so fortunate. I have such great helpers and friends that will also piece for me and bind. And so if I do bind a quilt, it's by machine. And it's probably last minute, and I feel too guilty to ask anybody else to do it. So I'm pretty sure the last quilt that I bound was before Christmas last year. So I've made it a really good stretch without having to do any binding. But that being said, I don't see anything wrong with a raw edge quilt. I think it's a little bit more rustic. And no? Okay. I just don't like to do the binding. I don't know why. Okay, Trisha says she's seen me quilt on a long arm standing up, on a sewing machine, and even on a sit-down long arm. Is there a word for ambidextrous? Is that something I can do? Am I comfortable with all of those? So I went from hand quilting, remember I just told you that, to long arming. And then when I started teaching, I realized that most people were quilting on their sewing machines, especially at that time. And I thought, oh, I better learn how to do this so I can teach it. The designs all go together the same way. I didn't have to learn new designs. I just had to learn how to connect this to my hands. And that's a humbling experience, right? When you know what you want to do, but your hands are not doing it. So I made myself practice for 15 minutes a day for quite a while to get comfortable at that other movement, because it's just a little bit different. Instead of moving the machine, then I'm moving the fabric. So in the beginning, switching back between the two was a little bit like, okay, I need to get in my mind what I'm doing now. But now, after several years, especially doing the free motion challenge quilting alongs have helped me just as much as they've helped some of you. I like to say I'm bilingual. I can speak both languages. But long arming was my first language, and that's definitely the one I choose if I can. But for a challenge or tutorial, I think it's so much easier for people to see it on a sewing machine and apply it to their machine, whether that's a long arm or a sewing machine. I think that's easier than doing it on a long arm and applying it to the sewing machine. Now, that being said, you will see some quilts on the Midnight Quilter quilted on the long arm. Not a majority of them, not even half. But every once in a while, I do want to throw that in there because it is such an important part of my quilting journey, and it's just a little bit different take on it. And even if you don't have a long arm, it's really fun to watch. You just kind of like stare at it. Sometimes I'm editing videos and I'm like, oh, the pretty quilt. You know, you just kind of go into a daze. So definitely you'll see those there too. But remember, the design is the same. It goes together the same. We're just driving a different vehicle. So it's all only difference. Speaking of long arming, Mindy says that she tenses up on the long arm. And so how can she not do that? So if somebody asks me, how can I make my quilting look better? Usually the first thing I'll say is relax. I've done enough classes where people are on their sewing machine and their shoulders are up around their ears and they're kind of like, oh, so tense. You've got to relax. You've got to move smoothly, and it's hard to do that when you're not breathing. On a long arm, it's very much the same. I will say you feel like you have no control on the long arm because sometimes it moves so smoothly. So when I'm setting up or training new owners on their long arm or teaching a class on long arms, if somebody is doing the death grip, I make them use their fingertips, right? So Mindy, use your fingertips. So use your fingertips to hold it and then quilt with it, right? So that feels weird, but you cannot tense your shoulders with just your fingertips. You can with your whole hand, but not your fingertips. So that's what I make people do. They get mad at me, but it helps you see that you don't have to tense to do it. So I will say that gets better with practice, the not tensing up. And if you like wine, that definitely helps too. Have a glass or some chocolate or an audiobook, just something to distract that critical part of our brain so you can relax and just do it. Sounds easy for me to say because I'm on the other side of it, but it's fun. You'll get to a point where you just kind of are quilting and it almost becomes like meditation, right? Your mind is wandering, everything is happy. Well, until the bobbin runs out or, you have to rip out quilting. But other than that, it's just so much fun. Okay, Rochelle, great question. All right. She says, how long does it take me to make a quilt from start to finish in real life? If you like the story or to believe in a story, like you could just mute the video right now because I'm going to tell you the real truth. If you want to know the truth, leave it on. Give me like 3 minutes. So for the Midnight Quilt Show and the Midnight Quilter, what you see is not the result of one quilt coming together. It's the result of one quilt already being finished and another one coming to completion in parts. So a lot of the pre-production planning is, what am I going to show? How are we going to break this apart in pieces so that it looks natural, but that we don't take 2 weeks to film, an episode. So that I have a lot of help. There's a lot of people piecing and quilting and binding. There's just so much help in the back. So that's not me doing it all. I like to say it's like when you're watching a cooking show, right? And they're making a roast. And they put the roast in the oven. You're like, oh, what's it going to look like? And then they open and pull the roast back out. That's a different roast, right? So I just have a different quilt. In real life, I can piece pretty fast. I'm not particularly perfect at it. It's not well pieced, but if I'm quilting my own stuff, I know how to quilt it out. So it depends on the quilt and the pattern, but it's definitely not within an hour or a day like you see on the video. So Anyway, let's see, any other questions? Oh, this was a good one, and I wanted to kind of answer it in a different way. So somebody mentioned, I don't even think it was to me, but it was like, for practice quilt sandwiches, right? You want to practice your quilting, but not on a quilt. I understand that. Batting can be expensive, right? What could you use in the quilt instead of batting to get that same practice? Well, and people suggested some fleece or some, something else. I can't remember, flannel in between. What we do at the shop when we have our long arms and demo pieces or whatever, when that quilt sandwich is filled up, we just put another piece of fabric right over the top of it and then quilt it again. Okay, so if you're solely quilting for practice and you fill up your quilt sandwich and you don't want to baste another quilt sandwich, you don't really plan on keeping this quilt sandwich, it's not like a present, you can put another piece of fabric over the top and quilt again. So that's how we handle it, because making a bunch of quilt sandwiches at the shop can be just a pain. So that's just a different workaround. I never ever thought about that until I was at Handy Quilter and they were doing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so much easier. So just a different option if you want. Great questions. And then Karen also asked, what's my favorite wine? My favorite wine is any. Okay, that's just my little joke. It's like a mom joke. I like red wine, it's my favorite, and Pinot Noir, but whatever. Good, Mindy. She's gonna try using fingers and singing. Last resort is drinking wine. Yeah, it's tenseness is definitely what comes from not being comfortable with what you're doing. I mean, it's like a new driver, driving a new car, like holding on to it. It's a normal response, and it's real easy for me to say, just relax, it'll be fine. Well, no, but it does get better with practice, and just stopping every once in a while and be like, oh, okay. I have noticed, for instance, when I'm editing videos for the Midnight Quilter, I'm like, end up hunched over the computer, my back is hurting. I'm like, oh, I need to stop and remember to not do that. So it's totally normal. Definitely just a great way to practice. So awesome questions. Loved them. So let's talk about the winner. So I do weekly giveaways. Terry Sanchez is the winner of the inked rainbow fat quarter bundle from the last video. She's already been emailed, but congratulations, Terry, about winning. The next giveaway is for a quilt kit for the Dresden plate quilt, the braided Dresden. So to enter the giveaway, when the chat is over, in the description box of the video, after the chat is over, in the description box, there'll be a link to it, and you'll just click that link and you'll enter your name and your email, and that's how I keep those together so I can pick a winner. And I'll announce the winner at next week's live chat. So in the past, I've done live chats for the Free Motion Challenge. I have so much fun with them, I decided, why not? Keep going with them. I didn't do them the last 2 weeks because of Thanksgiving, and then also last week I was teaching at a virtual quilt festival on Thursday, so that didn't work out for me. But today, obviously, and then next Thursday, same time, 3 p.m. Central. If you can't make it, it will still be available after the fact, so don't stress out about that. But it's going to be about backing, batting, and basting methods. So I'll just do a quick chat, 30 minutes, answering your questions about picking your backing, preparing it, picking your batting, what my favorites are, and then basting methods that might work for you. So definitely a lot of questions on that. I think it will be really helpful. And again, at that live chat, I'll announce this week's winner. And to enter that, you'll do that in the description box below. New video of Midnight Quilter will be out on Wednesday. Can't wait for you to see it with some English paper piecing. And then I'll be back to answer your questions on Thursday. So thank you so much for joining me for another live chat. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll get notified when I go live. And there was also a great question. I didn't write it down. How do you find all the dates for upcoming live chats? I'm going to put something on my website that will have all that aggregated in one place so that you can find it. Okay? So, all right. I hope you all have a safe and very happy weekend, and I will be back next Thursday with the next live chat. Until then, happy quilting.